She walked into our home that morning as if nothing in the world could tarnish her glow. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught in her hair, tousled in that effortless way that always seemed intentional. Her smile was wide and carefree, as though she had just returned from some luxurious retreat rather than the reality I now knew. The soft rustle of her bag landing on the entryway table was followed by her laughter, a sound that once lifted my heart, now slicing through me like the cruelest betrayal. I sat at the kitchen counter, clutching my coffee mug, pretending to be absorbed in my phone. But beneath the surface, my chest felt heavy, weighed down by a truth too unbearable to ignore. "Morning, babe," she chirped, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Her lips, soft and familiar, met my skin, but the gesture was hollow, a reflex rather than something real. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile that never quite reached my eyes. My knuckles turned white around the ceramic mug, my grip tightening as I held myself back from saying everything I knew. Confrontation was inevitable, but not yet. Not like this. I needed her to face the truth in a way she couldn't deny, to be forced to see the wreckage of her choices laid bare. My name is Daniel, and for 8 years, I was married to Claire. On the surface, we were the perfect couple. Steady careers, a beautiful home in Willow Heights, a love story that seemed like it had been plucked from the pages of a novel. She was my everything, the college sweetheart who had laughed at my awkward jokes, the woman who cried with joy when I proposed at sunset. Together, we built a life that felt unbreakable. Or so I thought. The cracks had begun to show about a month ago. Small, almost imperceptible at first. Late nights at work, an increasing attachment to her phone, a shift in her presence I couldn't quite define. I told myself it was stress, that her demanding role as a designer at Nova Vision, a high-pressure tech firm, was simply taking its toll. But then, the excuses began piling up. Business dinners that didn't add up. A hastily planned girls' trip. The way she subtly turned her phone away whenever a notification lit up the screen. It started as a gut feeling, that quiet, insidious whisper of doubt that you try to silence because the alternative is unthinkable. But suspicion has a way of taking root, growing, twisting, consuming every waking thought until it becomes impossible to ignore. One evening, when she was working late, I gave in to the paranoia. I opened her laptop, hating myself even as I did it. And there it was, an email thread she had carelessly left open. Ryan. His name appeared too often, in ways that were too familiar, too intimate. He was a colleague, someone I had met briefly at a company event. I had shaken his hand, completely unaware that this man was slowly dismantling my marriage from the inside out. The evidence mounted, a hotel reservation in both their names, a series of texts that left no room for doubt. Still, I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I was reading too much into it? But then, I found the final piece. A photo, buried deep in her phone. The two of them at a rooftop bar, her head resting on his shoulder like it belonged there. That night, while she was out at one of her supposed work dinners, I made my decision. I set up a small, discreet camera in our living room. And when the footage played back, it told me everything I needed to know. Her laughter. Their closeness. The way they stumbled into the home we had built together, completely oblivious to the sanctity they were shattering. I edited the footage into a short, undeniable montage and saved it under a folder labeled Claire's Choices. The next morning, I connected it to the living room television. When Claire walked through the door, she was radiant, at ease, completely unaware of what awaited her. She tossed her jacket onto the couch, greeted me with that same effortless charm, then settled onto the sofa, scrolling distractedly through her phone. And then, the sound began. At first, it was subtle, her laughter blending with the hum of a crowded bar. Then, the images flickered to life on the screen. Her head snapped up, her phone slipping from her hands as she saw herself seated too closely to Ryan, her fingers lingering on his arm in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. The scene shifted, the two of them entering our home, their bodies entwined, their whispers filling the space where our life had once existed. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her hands clutching at nothing. I stood behind her, arms crossed, my expression unreadable even as my heart pounded. "You tell me, Claire." She scrambled for the remote, desperation written across her face, but I was faster. I snatched it away before she could stop the playback. No, I said sharply, my tone leaving no room for argument. You wanted to keep this from me. Now watch. Watch what you've done. Tears welled in her eyes, her face crumbling as the truth played out in damning clarity. Daniel, please, she choked out, her voice breaking. This isn't. Don't insult me with excuses, I cut in, my voice eerily calm. Her tears fell freely now, streaking down her face as she pleaded, for understanding, for forgiveness. But all I could see was the image of her with him, laughing, as if the life we had built together was nothing more than a footnote. I'm sorry, she sobbed. It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I love you, Daniel. A bitter laugh escaped me, a sound so unfamiliar I barely recognized it as my own. You call this a mistake? I gestured at the screen. Bringing him here. Into our home. Into our life. She reached for me, but I stepped back, raising my hands as if warding off something toxic. Don't touch me. From the shelf beside me, I grabbed a folder and tossed it onto the coffee table. What's this? She asked, her hands trembling as she flipped it open. Your future. My voice was cold, detached. Inside were the divorce papers, signed and ready to file. You don't get to destroy everything and walk away unscathed, Claire. Actions have consequences. Her sobs turned frantic as she clutched at the papers, her voice rising in desperation. Please, Daniel. Don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do anything. I shook my head, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. You already made your choice, Claire. Now I'm making mine. And with that, I turned away. Her cries echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. Each step toward the door felt lighter, as if the burden I had been carrying for weeks was finally lifting. I inhaled the crisp morning air, letting it fill my lungs. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. My suitcase was already packed. Waiting. The night before I left, I moved through our home like a ghost, gathering the remnants of my life piece by piece. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt hollow, a shell of what it used to be. Every item I packed felt like reclaiming a lost fragment of myself. My books, my clothes, the framed photo of my parents that Claire had always disliked. Everything else, I left behind. Let it haunt her. When I finally closed the door behind me, I didn't look back. As I drove away, my grip on the steering wheel tightened, my knuckles turning white as the emotions I had suppressed for weeks surged to the surface. Anger. Betrayal. Heartbreak. How could she do this? How could she so carelessly destroy something we had built together, something I had believed was unshakable? Every promise we made, every moment we had shared, reduced to nothing but a lie. But beneath the storm of emotions, there was something else. Something quiet. A whisper of relief. As if, despite all the pain, I had done the right thing. As if this was not just an ending, but a beginning. The weeks that followed blurred into a relentless cycle of paperwork, legal meetings, and sleepless nights. Claire, unwilling to accept the finality of it all, tried everything to delay the process. She called incessantly, her voice cracking through tearful voicemails. She said she was sorry. That she had made a mistake. That she couldn't imagine life without me. But if that were true, why had she chosen someone else? Why had she risked everything we had for meaningless moments with him? Her desperation grew. One evening, she appeared unannounced at the modest one-bedroom apartment I had rented downtown. She stood in the hallway, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, cradling a small cardboard box in her arms. "Daniel, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm begging you. Don't throw this away." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You threw it away, Claire. The moment you let him into our lives." "It wasn't like that," she pleaded, her hands tightening around the box. "I was lost. I was confused. It didn't mean anything. You have to believe me." "I don't have to believe anything," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "And you don't get to rewrite the story now. You made your choices. I'm just living with the consequences." Her lips trembled, her fingers clutching the box like a lifeline before she finally set it at my feet. "Please," she whispered. "Just look through this. Remember what we had." We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't answer. Instead, I closed the door. The sound of it clicking shut was deafening, like a final nail sealing the coffin of what we once were. The box sat outside my apartment for days. I stepped over it each morning, ignored it each night, until finally, I carried it down the hall and let it fall into the building's garbage chute. Oblivion. The world around us reacted in waves. Friends reached out, some in shock, others in quiet support. A few admitted they had suspected something was wrong with Claire, but hadn't wanted to interfere. Our mutual friends split down the middle, like the parting of the Red Sea. Some sided with her, swallowing the story she spun about a momentary lapse in judgment. Others stood by me, disgusted by her betrayal. As for Ryan, I heard through whispers and half-concealed conversations that their so-called relationship crumbled within months. Whatever thrill they had found in secrecy had quickly faded under the weight of reality. It turned out he had a history, a man who chased after married women for the excitement but never stayed when things became real. I felt no pity when I learned Claire had moved out of her apartment and back into her parents' house in Crestview. She was starting over, forced to live in the shadow of her own choices. But for me, starting over meant something else entirely. I buried myself in work, rediscovered old hobbies, reconnected with friends who reminded me what it felt like to laugh without the weight of heartbreak pressing against my chest. I started therapy, not just to unpack Claire's betrayal, but to understand myself, why I had spent so many years prioritizing her happiness over my own. Months blurred into a year, and the anger began to fade. It didn't vanish, it left its mark, as all deep wounds do, but it no longer consumed me. It no longer defined me. I moved into a new apartment, one with large windows that flooded the space with sunlight. I filled it with plants, art, books, things that made it feel alive. I started running in the early mornings, pounding the pavement until all that remained of my grief was clarity. People often asked if I regretted the way I had handled things. If I wished I had been more forgiving, more understanding. The truth: I didn't. Because Claire's betrayal wasn't a fleeting mistake. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a series of choices, calculated, intentional, that showed complete disregard for the life we had built together. Forgiveness might come one day, but reconciliation never would. And I was okay with that. The last time I saw Claire was at a mutual friend's wedding. She approached me hesitantly, her once confident presence replaced by something quieter, almost fragile. She congratulated me on how well I seemed to be doing, her eyes scanning my face as if searching for a trace of the man she once knew. I smiled politely, thanked her. Then I walked away. She remained standing there, lost among a sea of people who no longer knew her as my wife. Some might say my victory was in the divorce settlement, in the prenuptial agreement that ensured she walked away with little. But that wasn't it. My victory was in reclaiming myself. In building a life that was full, authentic, untethered by her betrayal. That evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker against the horizon, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Life had a way of breaking you. But if you let it, it also had a way of remaking you. And in that moment, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be.